The theater kids at my school called me worthless, having no idea I used to be on Broadway. The mean theater kids at my school had no idea I used to be on Broadway. After 3 years of performing 8 shows a week, all I wanted was to be a normal 15-year-old at my new school, where nobody knew I'd originated the role of Sophie in the musical everyone was obsessed with. But then I walked into the auditorium and saw the popular theater kids clustered together wearing matching drama club hoodies. The Queen Bee Madison looked me up and down while I signed my name on the audition sheet, her face scrunching up. She whispered loud enough for everyone to hear that community theater rejects always thought they could waltz into their program just because mommy said they were special. Her minions Brittany and Jade giggled while Madison asked if I'd gotten my audition outfit from Walmart's clearance rack, pointing at my plain jeans and sweater that apparently screamed amateur hour to anyone with real theater experience. When I said I was auditioning for Sophie, Madison actually laughed so hard she had to grab Brittany's shoulder for support. She explained to everyone that Sophie required years of professional training to hit those notes, not whatever karaoke bar preparation I'd obviously had. Jade pulled up the Broadway cast recording on her phone and played the famous Act 2 solo that I'd performed over 1,000 times, asking if I even knew this was originally sung by someone who'd trained at Juilliard since age 7. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood because that someone was literally me, and I'd actually been training since age 5. Madison demanded I show them my audition song right there in the lobby since we all knew I wouldn't make it past the first cut anyway. When I started the opening verse, she immediately stopped me and demonstrated the correct breathing technique, while the others nodded like she was teaching a masterclass. She grabbed my diaphragm and pushed hard, saying I needed to feel the expansion if I ever wanted to produce real sound, instead of the squeaky whisper I was apparently producing. Brittany commented that my vowel shapes were completely wrong and physically manipulated my jaw while telling me to watch her mouth form the proper positions. During the actual audition sign-ups, Madison erased my name from the Sophie list and rewrote it under ensemble, explaining that even that was generous considering I moved like I'd never taken a dance class. She made me do a pirouette right there to prove I could at least spin without falling over, then shook her head sadly when I completed 3 perfect turns, saying my technique was shopping mall dance studio at best. Jade videoed the whole thing on her phone while providing commentary about how my arms looked like wet noodles and my spot was non-existent. The sabotage started when I went to change into my audition dress in the bathroom. Madison followed me in and, accidentally, spilled her entire iced coffee down my front, while gasping that she was so sorry. But maybe it was a sign from the theater gods that I should reconsider. While I was cleaning myself off, Brittany took my sheet music from my bag and crumpled each page into a ball before smoothing them out again, making them barely readable. She sweetly offered to let me borrow her marked-up copy, but every note was intentionally written wrong. When they called my name, Madison announced to the full auditorium that they were about to witness what happened when Disney Channel made kids think they had talent. She started a slow clap when I walked on stage, getting others to join in mockingly while shouting that I should save everyone time and just mouth the words, since we all knew I couldn't actually sing. Jade yelled from the back that her 9-year-old sister had played Sophie in their basement, and even she had better stage presence than whatever this was supposed to be. I started singing, and Madison stood up in the front row, turning to address everyone behind her while I performed. She provided running commentary about every single thing I was doing wrong, from my posture to my projection to the way I was butchering the composer's intentions with my interpretation. When I hit the high note perfectly, she actually said, "Auto-tune must be getting really advanced these days," loud enough for the whole auditorium to hear. Then I started the emotional monologue in the middle of the audition piece. Madison climbed onto the stage and stood right behind me, mimicking every gesture while making exaggerated faces to the audience. She pretended to cry dramatically when I delivered the pivotal line about losing everything, then whispered in my ear that the only thing lost here was everyone's time. Brittany shouted that she'd seen better acting in prescription drug commercials while Jade suggested I try the school's remedial public speaking class first. Madison grabbed the spotlight and redirected it so it was shining directly in my eyes, saying real performers could work through any distraction. She walked around me in circles while critiquing my blocking, my choices, even the way I was breathing between lines. Then she delivered the line that made my blood run cold. Sophie deserves someone who understands her journey, not some nobody who probably watched a bootleg once and thinks she can channel Broadway excellence when she clearly belongs in the ensemble of a middle school production, if we're being generous. That's when I heard a gasp from the director's table, and Mrs. Mitchell stood up with her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with recognition, as she stared at me and whispered my actual stage name. The name hung in the air for maybe 2 seconds before everyone in the auditorium turned to look at Mrs. Mitchell, then swiveled their heads back to stare at me standing there in my coffee-stained clothes. Madison's mouth was still open from her last insult, but no sound came out now, her face frozen like someone had pressed pause on her whole body. Mrs. Mitchell pushed her chair back so hard it scraped against the floor and started walking toward the stage with quick steps, her heels clicking on the auditorium floor. She climbed the side stairs and walked straight to Madison, putting her hand on Madison's shoulder and moving her aside without saying anything at first. Madison stumbled backward a few steps and grabbed the curtain to steady herself. Mrs. Mitchell turned to face the whole auditorium and raised her hand for silence even though nobody was talking anymore. She told everyone to sit down immediately because she needed to address something important about respect and professionalism in her theater program. Kids who were standing in the aisles dropped into the nearest seats, and even the tech crew stopped moving equipment backstage. Mrs. Mitchell pulled out her phone and started typing something while everyone watched in complete silence. The projector screen behind me lit up and she connected her phone to it, pulling up what looked like the Broadway website. She found the original cast recording page and clicked on the cast photos, and suddenly there I was on the huge screen, 12 years old in my Sophie costume with the Broadway lights behind me. People started gasping and whispering as they looked between the photo and me, some pulling out their phones to search my stage name. Madison took a step forward and opened her mouth, but Mrs. Mitchell held up her hand and cut her off before she could get a word out. She said they'd deal with the bullying and sabotage after we finished my audition properly, then called out to Kellen at the soundboard to reset everything for my piece. Kellen scrambled with the controls and gave a thumbs up while Mrs. Mitchell asked if I needed a moment to compose myself after everything that had happened. I shook my head and told her I'd like to finish my audition, but this time without any commentary or interference from anyone. Mrs. Mitchell nodded and announced that anyone who made even the smallest sound would be immediately removed from callbacks, and possibly suspended from the theater program entirely. The auditorium went so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. I walked back to center stage and planted my feet exactly where I'd started before, feeling hundreds of eyes watching me, but this time with curiosity instead of mockery. The music started again, and I took a deep breath. Not the fake one I'd been doing to hide my training, but a real one that filled my whole body. This time, I didn't hold anything back, and let my voice fill the entire space with the power and control I'd developed over 3 years on Broadway. My voice soared through the difficult passages that Madison had claimed needed years of training, hitting every note with the precision that came from performing this exact song over 1,000 times. I could see Madison in my peripheral vision, her face getting paler with each phrase as she realized what she'd been mocking. The emotional section came and I delivered it with all the depth I'd learned from working with Broadway directors who'd pushed me to find new layers every single performance. When I hit the climactic high note, several people in the audience actually gasped because it rang through the auditorium with perfect clarity. The song ended and I held my final position for 3 beats before relaxing, and the room stayed completely silent for what felt like forever. Mrs. Mitchell started clapping slowly from the side of the stage, then others joined in with genuine applause that built until most of the auditorium was clapping. She walked to center stage and announced that callbacks would be posted tomorrow morning and dismissed everyone except Madison, Brittany, Jade, and me. People filed out slowly, many still staring at me or checking their phones where they'd looked up my Broadway credits. Once the auditorium emptied except for us 5, Mrs. Mitchell turned to the 3 girls with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. She told them their behavior had been witnessed by multiple people and documented on Jade's own phone, which she'd seen recording the entire incident. She was reporting everything to the assistant principal immediately, and all 3 were banned from the rest of auditions pending a full disciplinary hearing about bullying and harassment. Madison started arguing that she didn't know who I was, but Mrs. Mitchell's voice got even harder as she pointed out that bullying was wrong regardless of someone's background or experience level. She added that Madison had just spent over an hour mocking and harassing someone she claimed to idolize, which said everything about her character and nothing good. The 3 girls left through the side door with Madison slamming it behind her, while Brittany and Jade followed with their heads down. Mrs. Mitchell waited until the door clicked shut, then turned to me with a softer expression, apologizing for not intervening sooner when she should have stopped it immediately. I explained that I just wanted to be normal after 3 years of 8 shows a week, that I was tired of being treated differently because of Broadway. She nodded and said she understood, but wished I'd felt safe enough to be myself from the beginning. I walked out of the auditorium and my phone started buzzing before I even made it to the parking lot. Someone had already posted a screenshot of the Broadway cast photo Mrs. Mitchell showed on the projector. The picture spread through group chats faster than I could track while I sat in my car watching notification after notification pop up. Theater kids who'd never talked to me were sending apology messages and asking if I could sign their programs from last year's shows. My Instagram follower count jumped by 300 in 20 minutes, and people were tagging me in their stories with crying emojis and shocked faces. Someone found a bootleg video of my final Sophie performance and shared it in the drama club group chat, where it got over 200 reactions within an hour. Kids were screenshotting Madison's comments from earlier posts and putting them next to my Broadway reviews, making compilation videos of her mocking me versus critics calling me a prodigy. My phone got so hot from all the activity that I had to turn it off and just sit there in the school parking lot trying to process what just happened. The next morning, the assistant principal called me out of first period and walked me to his office where he had a notepad ready. He asked me to describe everything that happened from the moment I walked into the auditorium yesterday, and I told him about the Walmart comment first. Then I explained how Madison erased my name from the Sophie list, and physically pushed on my diaphragm, and how Brittany grabbed my jaw to fix my vowel shapes. He wrote down every detail about the spilled coffee that ruined my audition dress and how they crumpled my sheet music while I was cleaning up. When I mentioned Madison climbing on stage during my actual audition to mock me behind my back, he stopped writing and looked up with his eyebrows raised. He asked if anyone else witnessed this, and I told him the whole auditorium saw it, plus Jade recorded everything on her phone. At lunch, I grabbed my usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria, but noticed theater kids kept walking past my table and staring. Brooklyn Palmer from my English class came over with her tray and asked if she could sit with me since I looked like I needed normal human company. She said she didn't know anything about Broadway or care about the whole theater thing, but what those girls did was seriously messed up. We ate our sandwiches while she told me about her older sister who got bullied by the soccer team and how the popular kids always found ways to make life hell for anyone different. She made me laugh by doing impressions of Madison's fake concerned face when she accidentally spilled the coffee. Other kids kept coming up to our table asking for selfies or autographs, but Brooklyn told them to leave me alone and let me eat in peace. The callback list went up after lunch, and a crowd gathered around it immediately while I hung back near the water fountain. Someone shouted that I was called back for Sophie along with two other girls whose names I didn't recognize. Madison's name wasn't anywhere on the list, and neither were her friends, except in tiny print at the bottom for ensemble callbacks. People started whispering about how Mrs. Mitchell was definitely making a statement, and someone said Madison's parents had already called the school. I grabbed my stuff and headed to callbacks, trying to ignore everyone watching me walk down the hallway. The auditorium felt completely different when I walked in for callbacks with everyone already knowing who I was. People moved out of my way and gave me nervous smiles, but nobody actually talked to me like a normal person anymore. The two girls called back for Sophie kept glancing at me during warm-ups like they were trying to figure out if they even had a chance. When we started learning the callback material, everyone stayed at least 3 feet away from me like I had some kind of Broadway force field. The music director kept asking if the tempo was okay for me, and if I needed any adjustments, which made everyone else exchange looks. During our first break, Kellen Ford came over while I was getting water, and stood there for a second before speaking quietly. He said he was sorry for not saying anything when Madison was being awful, and that he should have stepped in. Then he mentioned that the whole thing was actually on the backup recording system they use for archiving performances. He offered to pull the footage if I needed it for the disciplinary hearing, which was apparently happening next week. The dance callback started, and I picked up the choreography quickly, but noticed everyone else kept messing up their steps. They were watching me instead of the choreographer, who had to stop the music and tell them to focus on their own dancing. When we ran it again, people held back their movements like they didn't want to compete directly with me. The choreographer actually got frustrated and made everyone do push-ups before telling them to dance full out or leave. After we finished callbacks, Mrs. Mitchell asked me to stay behind for a minute while everyone else left. She wanted to check how I was handling all the attention, and if I needed any support from the counseling office. Then she mentioned that Madison's parents had called the principal threatening to sue over their daughter being removed from auditions. She said the video evidence plus multiple witness statements shut that down pretty quickly, but wanted me to know in case Madison tried anything else. That evening, I got home and found my mom already cooking dinner with my favorite pasta dish on the stove. We sat at the kitchen table, and she asked if I wanted to talk about everything that happened at the school. I told her about the callbacks and how weird it felt with everyone treating me differently now that they knew about Broadway. She listened while I explained how I just wanted to be a regular kid, but now that felt impossible. Mom said she supported whatever I decided about staying at this school, but reminded me that people would eventually find out anywhere I went. She pointed out that running away from this situation wouldn't change the fact that my past would follow me. We talked until almost midnight about what I really wanted, and whether hiding had actually made things better or worse. The next morning, I opened my locker and a printed article about my Broadway run fell out with writing across it in red marker. Someone had written, "We don't need fake celebrities here," across a photo of me in my Sophie costume from opening night. I picked it up and walked straight to the assistant principal's office, where he immediately called security to review the hallway footage. They found video of someone in a drama club hoodie putting the paper in my locker at 7:30 that morning. The assistant principal said they'd identify the person by the end of the day and deal with it accordingly. 2 hours later, during third period, the classroom door opened and the secretary called Sterling Riggs to the office. He grabbed his stuff slowly while everyone watched, and I heard someone whisper that security cameras caught him at my locker this morning. Sterling didn't come back to class, and by lunch everyone knew he got 3 days detention for harassment, plus Madison's suspension got extended another week. The next day, a girl I'd never seen before walked into theater class carrying a transfer slip, and Mrs. Mitchell introduced her as Nova Lockwood from Oregon. Nova sat next to me since it was the only empty seat and asked what we were working on without any weird looks or questions about Broadway. She said she'd done some community theater back home and wanted to keep performing. Then we paired up for the scene work Mrs. Mitchell assigned. Nova read through the script normally without staring at me or acting nervous, which felt so good after weeks of people treating me like some kind of museum exhibit. During rehearsal prep that afternoon, a sophomore named Wendy approached me while I was warming up and asked if I could show her how to do the breath support thing for high notes. I demonstrated the technique quickly. Then 2 more girls came over asking about vowel placement and projection. I kept my explanations short and simple, showing them the basics without mentioning Broadway or professional training. More students started gathering around, so I just worked through some standard exercises I'd learned years ago, keeping everything casual and helpful. Mrs. Mitchell watched from the corner and nodded when I caught her eye, then announced we'd start incorporating peer teaching into regular rehearsals. 3 days later, Madison walked back into the theater classroom with the assistant principal, who told everyone to take their seats immediately. Madison stood at the front holding a typed paper, her face red and jaw tight as she started reading in a flat voice. She said she apologized for her unprofessional behavior during auditions and acknowledged that bullying had no place in theater. She kept her eyes on the paper the whole time, reading about respecting all performers regardless of background and how she'd violated the school's code of conduct. When she finished, she walked straight to a back corner seat without looking at anyone. Mrs. Ed Mitchell stood up immediately after Madison sat down and announced major changes to the theater program starting today. She explained that competition between performers was natural, but cruelty would result in immediate removal from productions. She introduced a new mentorship system where experienced students would help beginners and everyone would rotate through teaching different skills. She posted a schedule on the board showing peer workshops every Tuesday and Thursday, with sign-ups for anyone wanting extra help. The cast list went up that Friday morning, and I found my name next to Sophie just like everyone expected. But there was another name there too. A junior named Sarah who'd also been cast as Sophie for alternating performances. Mrs. Mitchell pulled us both aside and asked if I'd be willing to coach Sarah on the role since she had less experience. I agreed right away because Sarah had always been nice and worked really hard during callbacks. We scheduled practice sessions for Monday and Wednesday afternoons in the choir room. That same cast list showed Madison's name in the ensemble, which surprised everyone since we thought she was banned completely. Mrs. Mitchell explained that Madison had written a detailed letter taking responsibility for her actions and requesting another chance. She made it clear that Madison was on strict probation, and any incident would mean immediate removal. No appeals. Madison kept her head down when people looked at her, focusing on copying the rehearsal schedule into her planner. Our first full cast rehearsal happened the following Monday, and you could cut the tension with a knife when Madison and I ended up in the same vocal warm-up circle. We stood on opposite sides, both looking at Mrs. Mitchell instead of each other, while the rest of the cast kept glancing between us nervously. During the read-through, Madison followed along in her script without commenting or making faces, even when I sang through Sophie's main number. When we had to interact during an ensemble scene, we both stayed professional, doing the choreography without making eye contact. The whole cast relaxed slightly when nothing exploded, though everyone still watched us carefully. 3 weeks passed with rehearsals staying weirdly formal but calm. Then Brittany found me after school by my locker. She said she needed to apologize for real, not the forced one from before, because she'd been thinking about everything that happened. She admitted going along with Madison because she was scared of becoming the next target, which she knew wasn't an excuse but wanted me to understand. 2 days later, Jade approached me separately during lunch, saying basically the same thing about fear making her do awful things she regretted. Neither of them asked for forgiveness exactly, just wanted to explain and take responsibility for their choices. I told them both I appreciated the honesty, and we started having normal conversations during rehearsals after that. Then Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Mitchell called me to her office where a woman from the local newspaper sat waiting with a recorder and notebook. The reporter had heard about a Broadway performer at our school and wanted to do a feature story about returning to regular school after professional theater. Mrs. Mitchell said the choice was completely mine, and she'd support whatever I decided about publicity. I thought about it for maybe 30 seconds before declining politely, explaining that I didn't want extra attention or to make the show about me instead of the whole cast. The reporter packed up her stuff and left while Mrs. Mitchell patted my shoulder and said she was proud of my choice. Tech Week started the next Monday, and everything felt different with the actual show approaching fast. Kellen found me at the loading dock entrance where we were unloading costume racks and grabbed 2 boxes from my hands without asking. He carried them inside and came back for more, working beside me in silence for 20 minutes before finally speaking up. He said he felt bad about not saying anything during my audition when Madison was being awful. I told him it was okay, but he shook his head and promised to make sure everything went perfectly for me during the show. True to his word, he checked my mic pack 3 times before every rehearsal and adjusted the spotlight angles so they wouldn't blind me during my big solo. He programmed extra lighting cues to highlight my entrance and tested the sound levels from every seat in the auditorium. During one tech run, he noticed static in my mic and spent his whole dinner break rewiring the connection until it was crystal clear. The other tech crew members started following his lead, double-checking all my costume changes were laid out properly, and making sure my props were exactly where I needed them. Wednesday afternoon, I was grabbing water from the fountain backstage when Madison appeared beside me and blocked my path to the stage. Her face looked different without the usual smirk, more tired and smaller somehow. She stared at the floor and said she needed to tell me something real, not the fake apology from before. She explained that theater was literally the only thing she was good at in her whole life. Her grades were terrible, she couldn't play sports, and even her parents only paid attention when she got cast in shows. When I showed up with actual Broadway experience, it made her feel like nothing she'd worked for mattered anymore. She didn't say sorry exactly, but admitted she took all her fears about not being good enough out on me. She walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there processing what just happened. Opening night arrived faster than expected, and my stomach was doing flips as I put on my costume and makeup. My mom texted that she was in the front row with a huge bouquet of roses, which made me smile and panic at the same time. Then she sent another text with a photo that made my heart race. 3 of my Broadway castmates were sitting next to her, including the original adult Sophie who'd mentored me through my whole run. They'd driven 4 hours to surprise me and support my return to the stage. Seeing their faces in that photo made me realize something important. I couldn't completely separate my Broadway past from my high school present, and maybe trying to hide it had caused more problems than just being honest would have. The stage manager called places, and I took my position in the wings, watching Madison and the other ensemble members find their spots. The curtain rose and the opening number began with everyone singing and dancing in perfect sync. My entrance came in scene 2, and I walked on stage to scattered applause from people who recognized me. I started my first song and let myself perform it fully, not holding back or trying to blend in anymore. Every note came out strong and clear, filled with the technique from thousands of professional performances, but also something new. The recent experiences with Madison and the bullying had given me fresh emotional depth to bring to Sophie's journey. The audience leaned forward in their seats as I delivered the emotional monologue that Madison had mocked during auditions. This time I felt every word differently, understanding Sophie's need to be seen for who she really was. My voice cracked slightly on the line about hiding your true self, but it felt right for the character and the moment. The Act 1 finale required the whole ensemble to support my big solo, and I caught Madison's eye during the build-up. She gave me a tiny nod and sang her harmony part perfectly, adding strength to my melody without trying to overshadow it. The curtain fell for intermission and the cast erupted in excitement backstage about how well everything was going. Act 2 flew by in a blur of quick changes, complicated choreography and emotional scenes that felt more real than ever before. The climactic moment where Sophie reveals her true identity hit different now that everyone knew my story. I sang the final notes with tears streaming down my face, not from sadness but from the relief of being myself again. The audience jumped to their feet before the last note even finished, giving us a standing ovation that lasted 5 whole minutes. During bows, I looked out and saw my Broadway friends cheering louder than anyone, proud of me for finding my way back. Madison stood next to me in the ensemble line, and when we all bowed together, she was actually smiling at me. Not a fake smile for the audience, but a real one that reached her eyes. The cast party happened at a pizza place downtown where everyone was still high on adrenaline from the show. Madison and I ended up at opposite ends of the same table, not exactly sitting together but not avoiding each other either. She caught my attention and mentioned a riff I'd added in Act 2 that wasn't in the original score. She said she'd never heard it done that way, and it actually made the song better. I thanked her and we went back to our separate conversations. But something had shifted between us. We weren't going to be friends, but we could exist in the same space without drama. 2 days later, the school counselor called me to her office for a check-in about everything that had happened. She wanted to help me process the complicated feelings about having my Broadway identity exposed against my will. We talked for an hour about boundaries and how to be authentic about my background without letting it define everything about me. She gave me strategies for handling the attention and questions, while still maintaining some privacy about my personal life. Nova had been watching everything unfold from her unique position as someone who met me after the revelation. She didn't treat me like a celebrity or a victim, just as another theater kid who happened to have cool stories. We started hanging out between shows, going to the mall and trying on ridiculous outfits we'd never actually buy. She introduced me to her favorite coffee shop where nobody knew or cared about Broadway, and we spent hours there doing homework and gossiping about school. One Saturday, we went to see a terrible movie and laughed so hard that people shushed us 3 times. She became my closest friend because she knew the whole truth, but still saw me as just me. When the spring musical got announced as Legally Blonde, everyone assumed I'd go for Elle Woods immediately. The sign-up sheet went up on a Monday morning and kids were already talking about how I'd obviously get the lead. But I'd been thinking about what I really wanted from high school theater, and it wasn't to always be the star. I signed up for Paulette instead, the supporting role with great comedy and one show-stopping number. People literally gasped when they saw my name under supporting roles instead of the lead. Mrs. Mitchell pulled me aside to make sure I understood I could have any role I wanted. I explained that I wanted to prove I was a team player who could support others, not just someone who demanded the spotlight. Madison's audition for Elle Woods was actually incredible, like she'd been preparing for months to prove herself. She nailed the vocals, the comedy, and the emotional moments without any of her old showing off or desperation. When the cast list went up, she'd earned the role completely on her own merit. She stared at her name next to Elle Woods for a full minute like she couldn't believe it was real. Spring rehearsals started with a completely different energy than the fall show had. Madison worked harder than anyone, always first to arrive and last to leave, determined to show she deserved her success. 3 weeks into rehearsals, she approached me during a water break with sheet music in her hands. She was struggling with a really difficult vocal run in So Much Better, and wondered if I had any tips. I showed her a breathing technique that would help her sustain the notes without straining. We worked on it for 10 minutes, just focusing on the music without any weirdness or tension between us. Other cast members watched us collaborating and started to relax, seeing that the drama was really over. A few weeks later, Brooklyn walked into the auditorium during our regular rehearsal, and stood by the door watching us run through a scene. She waited until Mrs. Mitchell called for a water break, then approached me near the piano, where I was marking some notes in my script. She said the whole vibe seemed different now, and asked if she could maybe help with costumes or something since she wasn't ready to perform yet, but wanted to be part of it. Mrs. Mitchell overheard and immediately handed her a clipboard with the props list, explaining that we needed all the help we could get for the spring show. Brooklyn started coming to every rehearsal after that, organizing the costume rack and helping people with quick changes between scenes. She brought her friends from student council to help build sets on weekends, and suddenly we had kids from all different groups working together in the theater. Madison watched this happen without commenting, but I noticed she started greeting the new helpers by name and thanking them for their work. The next month, Mrs. Mitchell gathered everyone after rehearsal and announced she was starting monthly workshops where experienced cast members would teach skills to younger students. She pointed at me and said she wanted me to lead the vocal sessions since I had the most training, then looked at Madison and asked if she'd teach audition prep. Madison's face went red, but she nodded and said she'd learned a lot about what not to do during auditions and could help kids avoid those mistakes. We scheduled the first workshops for the following Saturday, and 12 middle schoolers showed up, nervous and excited to learn from high schoolers. I taught them basic breathing exercises and warm-ups, while Madison worked with another group on choosing audition songs that matched their vocal range. We switched groups halfway through, and I watched Madison demonstrate how to enter a room with confidence without coming across as arrogant. She made the kids laugh by showing them her old audition mistakes in an exaggerated way, then demonstrated the right approach. The workshops became a regular thing, and more kids started signing up each month. Opening night of the spring show arrived faster than expected, and the whole cast was buzzing with nervous energy backstage. Madison had the lead role, and I could see her hands shaking as she adjusted her wig one more time before her entrance. When she walked on stage and started her first song, something magical happened, and she completely transformed into the character. She hit every note perfectly, and delivered her lines with such conviction that the audience was completely absorbed. During her big solo number in Act 2, I stood in the wings watching and found myself genuinely moved by her performance. When she came off stage after her bow, sweaty and glowing with adrenaline, she found me in the crowd of cast members and grabbed my arm. She said thank you, not just for cheering, but for showing her what being professional actually meant, and I knew she was being completely sincere. The cast party that night felt different from any theater event we'd had before, with everyone celebrating together without the old divisions. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Mitchell called Madison and me into her office with a huge smile on her face. She showed us an email on her computer from the State Theater Educators Association, announcing that our program had won the award for Most Improved Culture. The judges mentioned our mentorship program and the way we'd transformed from a competitive environment to a collaborative one, though they didn't know the specific details of what had started the change. She asked if we'd be willing to accept the award together at the state conference, and we both immediately said yes. Jade approached me the next day with a camera and asked if I'd be willing to be interviewed for her documentary about our theater program's transformation. She'd been filming rehearsals and workshops for her advanced film class and wanted to explore how groups can change their dynamics. She interviewed Madison first, then me, then brought us together for a joint interview where we talked about moving past conflict to find common ground. In her interview, Jade took responsibility for her part in the bullying and talked about how easy it was to get caught up in mob mentality when you wanted to fit in. She showed us the rough cut a week later, and it was actually really powerful, showing how toxic environments could be transformed when people chose growth over grudges. Sterling found me after school one day when I was running lines in the empty auditorium. He sat down next to me and finally apologized for putting that article in my locker, admitting he'd done it because Madison was his girlfriend, and he didn't want to upset her by refusing. He said he'd been avoiding me because he felt guilty, but realized that was just making it worse. He offered to be our official videographer for next year's shows, saying he wanted to contribute something positive instead of being remembered for being a follower. I told him everyone deserves a second chance if they're genuinely trying to change. On the last day of junior year, Mrs. Mitchell announced next year's drama club leadership to the whole program. She named Madison and me as co-presidents, saying our journey from conflict to collaboration made us perfect examples of what theater could teach about working together. Everyone applauded, and Madison and I looked at each other with a mix of surprise and determination to make it work. We met at a coffee shop the first week of summer to start planning the next season. Madison brought a detailed spreadsheet of possible shows with pros and cons for each one, while I had notes about technical requirements and casting considerations. We spent 3 hours going through options, and while we weren't suddenly best friends, we found a rhythm of building on each other's ideas instead of tearing them down. She handled the organizational stuff like scheduling and budgets, while I focused on the artistic elements like vocal arrangements and choreography. We met every week that summer, sometimes at the coffee shop and sometimes at the school to inventory costumes and organize the prop room. By August, we had the whole season planned and had even started recruiting incoming freshmen through the orientation program. Mrs. Mitchell got invited to speak at education conferences about creating inclusive theater spaces and asked if Madison and I would come share our perspectives. We presented together at 3 different schools that fall, telling our story without using anyone's full names but being honest about how bad things had gotten and how we'd work to fix them. Teachers asked us questions about specific strategies, and we explained the workshop system and the importance of having clear expectations for behavior. The presentation spread, and soon other schools were implementing similar programs. Senior year started with Madison and me leading warm-ups together in front of 40 theater students. We developed a routine where she led physical warm-ups, and I led vocal ones, demonstrating how different strengths could complement each other. The new freshmen had no idea about our history, and just saw two leaders who clearly respected each other's expertise. They came to us with questions and problems, and we handled them as a team, always presenting a united front even when we disagreed privately. The fall musical auditions brought a record number of students trying out, including kids who'd never done theater before but felt welcomed by the new environment. Madison and I ran auditions together, taking notes and discussing casting without any of the drama that had defined our earlier years. We chose shows that gave opportunities to lots of students instead of just featuring a few stars, and everyone seemed invested in making each production successful. The transformation was complete, but the work of maintaining it continued every day, with both of us committed to never letting the program slide back into toxicity. Spring brought college acceptance letters, and Madison burst into the drama room waving her envelope from the Performing Arts Conservatory while everyone else was stretching for rehearsal. She asked if I'd write her peer recommendation, even though the deadline was in 2 days. I went home and sat at my laptop for 3 hours typing about her transformation from someone who poured coffee on me to someone who taught freshmen with patience. I described her vocal range and her choreography skills, but mostly wrote about watching her learn that talent without kindness meant nothing. She texted me thanks after submitting it and said she'd been accepted 2 weeks later. Our final show together was Legally Blonde, and we were both in the ensemble since we'd given leads to underclassmen. 20 minutes before curtain, Madison found me doing my makeup and stood behind my chair in the mirror. She said she was grateful everything happened because it taught her who she wanted to be. I told her hiding myself had given everyone else power over my identity. We did our pre-show rituals separately, but met in the wings during Elle's costume change. The stage lights made her glitter spray sparkle, and she squeezed my hand before we rushed on stage for the courtroom scene. Graduation came in May, with both our families in the bleachers holding flowers and signs. The theater awards got announced during the ceremony, and Madison won Most Improved while I got Excellence in Performance. We walked across the stage from opposite sides and met in the middle to shake hands. The photographer caught that moment, and later it ended up in the yearbook above a caption about growth. 5 years passed with me back on Broadway, in a new show about sisters finding each other after decades apart. During a 10-minute break between scenes, my phone buzzed with a Facebook message from Madison. She was directing at a regional theater in Ohio and wanted to license Sophie for their season. She wrote that she finally understood what the show meant about growing stronger through hard times. Her theater's website showed her bio mentioning her high school experience with a Broadway performer who taught her about grace. I wrote back saying yes, and that I'd love to see her production if she wanted me there. She responded immediately asking if I'd consider doing a talkback after opening night about the show's origins. We set the date, and I marked my calendar, thinking about how different this invitation felt from that first day in the auditorium. The stage manager called places, and I put my phone away to transform into my character. That night's audience had no idea that during intermission I was messaging with someone who once told me I belonged in middle school ensemble. Madison sent photos of her cast in first rehearsal, and I recognized the hunger in their faces. She'd written Sophie's journey on the whiteboard behind them in the same purple marker Mrs. Mitchell always used. Well, friends, this really has been a journey, and I appreciate you sticking with me through all my questions and wonderings. Can't wait to do it again. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.